I wanna hear your voice in the rainy wind. I wanna know it's safe to be a child again. Ooh.
I always wanted my own WWE walkout song, so that's my walkout song for today. We're going to come back to that song later, because for me that's probably one of my favorite songs lyrically, and the verses that are written in that song. So it's going to come back later this morning. I was thinking about why they asked me to speak to all of you today. You know, the last few years you've had renowned speakers that are very knowledgeable in their fields. Instead you get me, so I've determined basically I'm a product of the budget cuts. That's why I'm here this morning. And I am not an expert, and I feel every time I've been giving wellness talks in the district, I need to put the disclaimer, I am not an expert. I do not know these things. I'm simply coming to it from a perspective as a priest, working with people, my own personal experience and things that I work through, and just a theological and a faith reflection on this topic. So that's what I would invite you to this morning, is just to take the questions I pose and the ideas that I propose as kind of your own self-reflection in the way that you understand wellness and your faith and the way that the two fit together. So I'm just going to start out really bluntly stating my goal for this morning. Here's my thesis. What if the most prevalent contributor to mental health struggles is not stress or circumstances, but rather our own pride? Basically, I'm proposing that widespread, it's not so much the disorder and the chaos that we experience in the world around us, but actually the disorder and the chaos that exists within ourselves that is the greater contributor to the struggles that we experience and that others around us experience in terms of mental health. So I'm going to spend the rest of our time this morning trying to convince you that that is true, and also to give you hope, because facing ourselves is never an easy thing. So if we're going to talk about pride, we have to go back to the very beginning, where pride enters into the world. So I'll quickly read to you the story of the fall of Adam and Eve, and then we'll start pulling it apart. Now the serpent was more subtle than any other wild creature that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say you shall not eat of any tree of the garden?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. And they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man, and he said to him, "Where are you?" And he said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself." He said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" The man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this that you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent beguiled me, and I ate. I think sometimes when we approach the story of Adam and Eve, it kind of seems, I think often when it's told, it's kind of a child's story about good and evil, what to do, what not to do. But you can pull apart so much in that story of Adam and Eve and of what is actually taking place and the truths about our relationship with God and our relationship with the world that show up in just that short little verse. And out of Adam and Eve and the choice to disobey what God desires from them, we can see these three consequences that arise right away. We'll go back later and talk about the pride that led to the fall. Well, we're going to start with the effects of the fall. So the first is shame, right? Their eyes were opened. And this is the only time in all of Scripture where to be open is actually a bad thing. To see more is actually a negative consequence, because what do? Rather than being free and open and vulnerable with each other in their nakedness, now they hide themselves by sewing fig leaves together and making an apron, making clothes. And then they hide themselves. God walks freely with them in the garden. They never were afraid of him before, but now all of a sudden they feel the need to run away from God and from each other. God doesn't address the both of them together after the fall. They're separated one from the other. And they're anxious about the consequences of the choice that they made. And then finally, hopelessness creeps in. That they start to accuse each other and accuse somebody else. It's the woman's fault, it's the serpent's fault. The fault is out there. This is why everything is broken. There's nothing I can do about it. It wasn't me that created this situation. I'm just a victim of the situation and the circumstances that have come my way. And there's the beginning of the fall. Now, if you do a quick little Google search of the causes and effects of mental health issues, I think you can kind of basically clump them all into those same few categories. When I just looked at different places that described what causes mental health issues in people, for me, at least in the way that I see it, you can classify them in those categories. So different forms of abuse. Well, what's the number one? All of these fit with every cause of mental health. But primarily, abuse comes with a lot of shame. And that's a big reason why it's so hard to get out of situations of abuse, is because the shame that comes with it. It's all my fault. I should have done more. I should have been better. And the shame comes. Then you have different forms of isolation, whether those are social or internal, and isolation creates anxiety, because now we no longer know how to be connected with others, and we know that being connected to others is essential to being human and to being alive. And then you have different forms of bereavement, of loss, whether that's loss of loved ones, whether that's loss of employment, whether that's just loss of dreams that you had. Bereavement can come with a sense of hopelessness. What do I have to look forward to? And then one that is more self-inflicted than all of the others is substances. And we don't often talk about, I don't think, how they contribute to struggles with mental health. Whether that's drugs and alcohol, whether that's pornography and sexual immorality, whether that's our entertainment that we have in all of its various forms, from social media to all of these things. All of these can contribute to struggles with mental health. That drugs and alcohol contribute to anxiety. Pornography contributes to shame. And entertainment leads us down the road of hopelessness. And so already we can see how what faith is teaching us, the way that God inscribes within us our knowledge of the effect of pride and its causes, ties into what we already know of mental health. Because for me, one of the things that I'm convinced of, sometimes we think that our awareness of mental health and the discipline of psychology is something new in the last 150 years in humanity, and we're finally becoming aware of it. this has always been part of the Christian tradition. We didn't talk about it in the same way, we didn't use the same terms that we use today, but from the very beginning, when God said, "You shall love me with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength," the awareness of the whole human person has always been there. And if you're willing to see the different words that are used, when you read the lives of the saints and you read the writings that we have in our spiritual collection as Christians, it comes up over and over again. It's tied together. Because for me, problems of wellness are problems of faith. The reason for that is because of the way that we're created. We are body and soul. We are enfleshed souls. And so whatever happens in the mind affects the body and it affects the soul. Whatever happens in the body affects the mind, affects the soul, and whatever happens in the soul affects the body and affects the mind. They're not separate parts, one from the other. We are a whole. And I think part of the thing that exacerbates things now is with a very scientifically driven society, to the point of scientism. I'm not saying science is bad. That's where I started my post-secondary studies, was in science. But in this scientism where everything has to be broken down into its finest detail, that's fine. It brings a lot of understanding by breaking down the parts and the pieces. But how do you put them back together again? That's what we don't have an answer for. And so if you break everything down to all of its pieces, but you don't have any way to pull them together again into a whole, then you're just left in pieces. I might know everything about myself, all of my different strengths and weaknesses. I might know how they interact with each other. I might have this great self-awareness and knowledge of myself, but if I don't have any way that they fit together as a whole, then what's the point of knowing all those things? See, as a Christian, we don't determine what those parts are. We don't even determine what the proportion of the different parts are. Who we are is given to us. Wellness comes from the way that we integrate the way that we have lived in the world, our own experiences, with our awareness of who we are gifted as, and the integration of those two things is what brings wellness. But I think sometimes when we talk about wellness, or when we hear wellness talked about, it's about this perfect balance between the different parts of myself. Yeah, kind of, but not completely. Because there's a lot of dangers that can creep in with that kind of mentality. Here's part of my struggle. When I first talked to the chaplains last year, I was looking up wellness. What is wellness? So I went, and there's a definition there for the Centre for Disease Control in Canada, and the Government of Canada website also has a definition of what wellness is. And when I look at this definition of wellness, I'm still left, okay, so what is wellness? Because all that I see in that definition is it includes everything about you as a person, and the way that it's written there, the way that I see it, is it's completely self-referential. So it's about all the parts of me and of what I do with those parts of me. Okay, again, it's part of the answer, but how could that be the whole answer? We know that we're social beings. And so now it's no longer just me, but it's others. And not just the way that I interact with others, but the way that others interact with me. And that we acknowledge that the world created around us isn't of my own making, it's there, and I'm a part of it. So how do I integrate myself into that? How do I become a part of the world rather than trying to make the world become a part of me? One of the dangers in all of this is if I'm constantly moving towards self-creation, that I have to create myself, I have to create this proportion and balance, then everybody else has to conform to my understanding of what that looks like. And that becomes problematic over time. Oh, I jumped ahead too fast. What are the different dangers that arise Shouldn't ever use papers. It's a bad presentation tool because then you lose track of where you are. So, if we have wellness on one side, what is faith? If we're going to understand faith, probably the easiest place to find the definition of faith comes from the letter to the Hebrews. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. By faith, we understand that the world was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was made out of things which do not appear. The assurance of things hoped for, which is what we often hear when we hear that part, but what I think is equally important, particularly today, is that things unseen brought into creation things seen. Because ultimately, when we're talking about wellness, what we're pursuing are intangible things, right? What makes us well? It's when we are loved, it's when we are at peace, it's when we find joy. These are the things that we're pursuing, and we're trying to find the ways that I can find those things. But how can I pin those things down? How can I define the way that those things are manifested in my life? We're pursuing these intangible things, and if we're just living from self-creation, and we're just living in creating balance and proportion between the different parts of our life and the different parts of ourselves, then am I really trying to create unseen things by the tangible and material things in my life? Is that really possible? Is it possible to take the material things around me and to manifest those unseen things? Right? It's that old phrase, money doesn't bring happiness. And people say, well, it kind of does. But why? How do we interact with those unseen things? Right? If mental health and wellness are all trying to grapple with the things that we can't pin down, with the things that we struggle to hold on to, what does that interaction look like between our material existence and those unseen things? And faith has always been about bringing those two things together. Because faith, for us as Christians, goes both ways. Faith is subjective. It is my yes to God. Just like Mary to the angel Gabriel, let it be done to me according to your word. It requires our yes to God. God doesn't impose himself into our life. He invites us into a life of faith. And so we have to be willing to say yes. But faith is also an objective gift. Faith for us, particularly our Catholic understanding, faith, hope, and charity are what we call theological virtues. And the reason that they stand apart as theological virtues is because they don't come from practicing longer and harder. They come as a gift from God, first and foremost. This is part of the reason why we baptize infants, because we acknowledge that there is a real gift of God's grace given to this child who's not yet capable of giving their yes to God, but there is a real gift of grace that can be offered to them through this sacrament of baptism from the very start. And so it has to be this relationship between those two, what exists within myself and what is gifted to me from outside of me. Because there's dangers that creep in. There's a danger of balancing parts, as I've said already. What does that mean? Well, I was talking to a woman that I know who lives alone during the pandemic. Obviously doubly hard to live alone. She also had a friend who lived alone. And so they called each other on a regular basis to kind of help each other through that isolation, especially during the really quarantine phases. Her friend, before going into the pandemic, kind of dealt with a little bit of depression. So obviously that made things harder and worse. And so this woman that I know was open and available to her all the time whenever she needed to talk. Well, at a certain point of the pandemic, this woman that I know, she started to kind of slip into depression. And so she needed a little bit of extra support. And so she reached out to this friend she had been kind of initiating the support along the way, and she said, I need help. And the friend's response was, I can't help you. I don't have the ability to do that. I need to protect my mental health. And so if we're just trying to balance proportions, what happens is we have to start blocking things out, because whatever throws off that equilibrium that we're trying to create in our life then becomes a threat to that. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't try to find balance. It doesn't mean that we don't say no to certain things because there's lots of things coming our way. But if we're too focused on creating this equilibrium in our life, then everything outside becomes a threat. And we have to shrink our world down to a manageable size, and then we can't let others and other things into that life. Another danger is everything is dependent on externals. So that relationship between the unseen and the seen, where wellness, my self-care is only dependent on external things. So think about this. Is self-care available to the poor, to the homeless? Are your go-tos for self-care, if you lost all of your money today, would you still have access to your methods of self-care? Because sometimes, myself included, self-care, it kind of creeps over into the side of just being self-indulgent. And it might bring kind of momentary relief and escape, but it's not really self-care. It's just self-indulgence. After I've given of myself so much throughout the day, now I will take something for myself, and it brings me some momentary peace, momentary joy, and then it's gone. Or if you go away on holidays, do you feel like coming home at the end? Or was it just an escape and you want to run away, and it's good while you're away, but then it hasn't offered you any sort of respite, any sort of recovery while you were away? You just went, and I have in my head what that might look like, but I won't judge you all on the holidays that you take. But does our holiday time, our time away, is it retreat, where we step away from everything so that we have a better understanding of the life that we're called to live? Or are we constantly working towards the next time I can get away from the stresses and responsibilities that I have in my life? And that I live for the weekend. I live for spring break. And then after spring break, then what comes next? Well, this year Easter doesn't come after, it comes before, so now you're stuck until the end of June. That's a long stretch. So can you make it? Right? If it all becomes about externals, if it's never about the unseen, problems arise. And here's one that was not fun when I realized that it was possible in my own life. Even faith itself can become self-indulgent. When your faith becomes only about your own self-improvement, it's lost its purpose. What do I mean by that? Well, when couples come to me for marriage, one of the questions in the first interview with the couple that a priest asks, just to kind of set the stage of why we're doing what we're doing, there's 3 questions that the priest asks the couple. And the first one is, what role does religion play in your life? And about 90% of the time, the answer is the same. Well, religion gives me an understanding of my values in my life and helps me make choices. Okay, good start. But if that's all that is, I was thinking about what would be the equivalent in marriage. You know, if that's the person's approach to faith, that religion brings them the values that they need to walk through life, what would be an equivalent in marriage? Well, to me, the equivalent in marriage would be, well, I'm getting married because then there's possible tax benefits, and we'll have dual income, and then I won't have to worry about ever being alone. So that's why I'm getting married. It's like, okay, those are good things. It's not good to be alone, and it's hard to live by yourself and just live on one income. But is that really a reason to be married? And so we can ask, is that really a reason to have religion, where that's all that kind of moves things forward? I was talking to a guy on my hockey team last night. He's in the jewelry business, and I'm in the wedding business, so we were talking about a partnership along the way. But I was like, I only have one wedding this year. Part of that's because I'm in Camrose, and our senior population is much greater than our younger population. But priests across the board, the amount of young people who want to be married in the church is vastly decreasing. Even in the 10 years that I've been a priest, the numbers have gone down just in the last 10 years significantly. One of the reasons is a lot of people want to get married outside. They want to get married in the mountains, they want to get married on the beach in Mexico. I get it. I like being on a beach. I love being in the mountains. But what are we saying and what are we doing? See, that is trying to create a wedding that reflects what I love and what I enjoy. When we're getting married in the church, we're not just saying we're getting married in the physical structure of the church. When we're saying we're being married in the church, the physical structure of the church is symbolic of being married in the church, under the protection and the guidance of the church given to us by Jesus. That through the church, God moves us and guides us and directs us in our life. And so it flips. It's not from what is seen, getting married in Banff at the Fairmont with the beautiful mountains and perfect pictures that you can keep forever of that wedding day, of these seen things, to try to create the unseen reality that you hope for in a lifetime of marriage. In the church, we're doing the opposite. That maybe you actually don't even have a really nice church to get married into, that your home parish is kind of a little bit ugly, because those do exist. But what you're trying to do on your wedding day is allow the unseen things that God desires for man and wife to take root from the start, and then they can manifest themselves materially in your life from there. How do we move from what is unseen into what is seen? So, with all of that, now we get to pride. Before I go to the next one, show of hands, who here has watched the TV show Breaking Bad? Okay, sorry to everybody else, because this next example is not going to be as meaningful. Just to set the stage a little bit, basically the premise of the show is there is this middle-aged man who has an older son, and he's about to have a newborn baby, so he's like in his early 50s. He's about to have another baby in his early 50s. He started out his adult life as this very renowned scientist, and he was innovative with a couple others. That partnership broke off for reasons. He became a high school teacher, which was always a sore point for him because he's too smart to be a high school teacher. As his new daughter is about to be born, he gets diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And he's riddled with debt. He has nothing to leave his family. He feels like a failure. And so what comes before him is the possibility of, because he's a very good chemist, creating the best methamphetamines that are out there and selling it so that he has money to leave behind for his family. And basically all through the show, every time somebody challenges him on his choices, he's saying, I'm doing it for my family. I'm doing it for them. Part of the reason that I love the show so much is the nuanced expression of the fall into pride. So it's been out for a long time, so I'm not worried about giving spoilers for whoever hasn't seen this. This is basically the last episode. And so he's lost everything now. He's going to die. He's separated from his wife and his children. He's completely alienated. He's coming back. His wife is under protective custody, and he breaks into the home for this final interaction between him and his wife.
Skylar. All the things that I did, you need to understand.
I have to hear one more time that you did this for the family.
I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. And I was really I was alive.
What I find striking on that scene is Bryan Cranston is great in that series. So he finally is able to admit the first time to himself and to somebody else, the whole reason that I did all this was because me. I felt like crap. I didn't like who I was, and I needed something to feel in control again, to feel alive. But then at the very end, after he's finally admitted that, you just see him kind of close his eyes. And to me, it's realizing how futile all that was. Yeah, he gained all those things that he had never had in his life before, but because it was all directed by pride, he lost everything in the process. Now the reality is, Walt, that character, he wasn't more proud at the end than he was before the show even started. He had the same pride before as he did after. It just manifested itself differently. Pride is a very insidious sin. There is pride that we hide from. One example is false humility, right? Where we do something well for somebody else, and they are giving us accolades of how great you are. Thank you so much for doing this. This is the best. You're the best person ever. No, it was nothing. It was me. But inside, you're going, thank God somebody noticed. And we're just craving for somebody to acknowledge the good that we're capable of doing because we're insecure. We want to be loved. And so we just are dying for that. But externally, I'm not going to show off, look, you're darn right, I did a good job. You better tell me good job. No, I'm going to be humble on the outside. And so we hide what's really manifesting as pride underneath. Another one is the pride that we ignore. What bad habit do I have in my life that's been around for a really long time? Yes, there are things about habits. There's brain chemistry that plays into that and personal experiences that drive those habits deeper, and they're hard to break. Every habit's breakable. So why haven't I broken my bad habit yet? Well, there's this reason and there's that reason, or I've tried this way. It's not hard. People who don't have that bad habit will tell you the way that it's capable of doing, the way that you're capable of getting out of it. So why do we still have it? Most of the time, it's because I'm too proud to let go of the things in my life that I need to let go of in order to start fresh, right? Somebody who's an alcoholic can't say, well, I'll go from over drinking to just having one drink a day. No, every alcoholic will tell you, I can never have a drink again. I need to cut it out of my life. I might need to cut friends out of my life who lead me to drink, and I need to be humble enough to accept that that has to be done. And until I do that, that habit's not going to be broken. And not only that, I need a sponsor to help me through because I know I won't be able to do this on my own. And I need to be willing to admit before other people, hi, my name is Kris and I'm an alcoholic, because that public expression of humility is needed to humble that pride within me that says, I need another drink. Part of what keeps us from breaking out of our habits, being open to the grace that is being offered to us to lead us through, is pride. That we kind of ignore that that's actually pride motivating it. And then there's the pride that we aren't even aware of in ourselves. I'll give you kind of a silly example. After I was ordained a priest, a few of us went and hiked the West Coast Trail. This was kind of my first ever extended backpacking trip. And basically everybody else on the trip except one, it was our first kind of extended backpacking trip. So we had prepared all this food in advance. Well, by day 3 or 4, we were realizing we didn't pack enough food, that we weren't getting enough calories enough in a day, and so we were starting our days out, and we were already kind of weak, and I was starting to trip on roots, and I was going to hurt myself. And so when we got to the end of the 4th day, and we're sitting around camp at the end of the 4th day, I had talked to another buddy on the trip, I got to say something. I got to say something about making this trip end faster, because we don't have enough. So we're sitting down at camp, and I go, okay, guys, I don't know if you're going to agree with me. I don't know if you guys are all in the same situation. And you can tell me what you think after I'm done. But there's some things that have been happening the last few days, and I really think we need to talk about it as a group. And somebody just said, just say it already! But what was I doing? I was trying to make sure that nobody was going to be upset by saying it in the most perfect way that I think our trip is ruined. That we have to completely rethink how we're doing our trip. But I didn't want to say that because I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And I've held on to that ever since. And I still do it, but I do it much less. Just get to the point. It's pride that makes me think that I can actually control the situation and people's emotions enough to make sure that everybody's okay. What part of pride within ourselves are we still not even aware of that others have to make us aware of? Let's go back to Adam and Eve. What always struck me with Eve is after she faces the serpent, and the serpent tempts her to take from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, she comes to 3 conclusions. She says, it's good for food, it's a delight to my eyes, and it makes one wise. Which conclusion's a bad one? Out of those 3, which would you go, well, that was dumb? No, it's delight to the eyes. Looks really good, and it's good to eat, and I need to eat. Eating is good, and I'm supposed to be wise, so if this makes me wise, then all the better. So where's her fault? If all those conclusions are good, where's her fault? God was not part of the equation. The reason that God told them not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is because wisdom was not something that they were intended to take for themselves, but was a gift that was to be bestowed on them. And the moment that Eve chose to gain wisdom for herself, apart from God, she rejected him. Because ultimately, pride is simply not being willing to acknowledge that I am a dependent being. Pride is any time that I think, in whatever way, shape, or form, that I feel that I can be self-sustaining. I can do this on my own. I know the way. And as Christians, that is never the case. We are always dependent beings. So part of it is, I think I'm responsible, and I can do it alone. So, I'll flip it back on you. As teachers, as administrators, when does that temptation creep into you? I am responsible, and I am alone in this. And how does that creep into the way that you approach teaching? Especially with all of the expectations that come your way, whether that's what our children need to receive in the education system, whether that's the responsibilities that parents just basically hand off to you and say, well, that's your job, and what's coming down from administrators, what's coming down from central office. It's like, I'm responsible for all those things. And I have this amount of days, and now we have an assembly in the middle of the day, and it's taking away my teaching time, and now we're supposed to go on this field trip, and how am I going to fill all these responsibilities? And nobody's here to help me because we don't have enough funding for EAs that we need in my class. I am responsible, and I am alone. Are you? What are you actually responsible for? Like if you actually stopped, broke it down, what are you responsible for as a teacher? Be there for your kids. Help them to get through the day well. Because not every kid is going to excel. You know that. Most of the time. Maybe part of you wants all of your kids to excel. Because then if all of your kids excel, then you've succeeded. Maybe they won't. Maybe they will. And when you feel alone, are you alone? Do you feel alone just because you feel like all of the weight of responsibility and burden is on you? Do you feel like you're alone because people aren't giving you what you want and need? Or can I become more open to, even though my principal isn't giving me what I want, he, she is still listening and trying to give me what they can. So that doesn't mean I'm alone. There's somebody there. We're all kind of faking our way through it along the way, but we're doing it together. It's broken and it's imperfect, but we're doing it together. How often do we share, really share, and ask for what I'm struggling with in my classroom? Is it just your classroom, or are you in the school? It's not just your classroom, right? How much do you share with the teacher that's inheriting your kids next year, besides just watch out for Johnny because he's a handful? What if you sat down before the school year and talked with the next teacher about every student, the successes and failures? This is what worked for me. This is how I helped in a way, and it seemed to click. Something that didn't work, or this is what I tried and it worked terribly. Don't try that with her because it's just not going to work. Are we actually alone, or just we make ourselves alone? Eve was alone, but not really. She went to Adam after she made the choice. She didn't say, hey, Adam, serpent's saying this. Does this fit with what God was trying to tell us? Is this what we're supposed to do? No, she did it alone. And she felt responsible for growing in wisdom. This is why, over and over again, what we have from Jesus and in our life of faith is that unless you become like a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. That being childlike before God is at the heart of our Christian life because it's the continual acknowledgement that no matter how old I am dependent. I am always dependent. That's why we begin our Christian life through baptism as sons and daughters of God. And that one of the simplest tasks, but the hardest task of being Christian is being willing to admit day after day, I'm a little boy in God's sight. I'm a little girl. I really know nothing. I really can't do anything. But with God, all things are possible. Which brings me back to the song from the beginning. Child again. The group is called Need to Breathe. Like I said, it's the lyrics in the song that the first time I heard it kind of threw me off. Because it's talking about the desire for that childlike innocence again. And the ways that pride comes in and erases that innocence, that freedom to want to be dependent and hopeful again. So the first, too smart to feel heartbreak now, too old to let my safeguards down. I think I know my way around. There's Eve's temptation to be wise. Trading magic for a measured hope, traded dreaming for a worn-out home, tired of being in control. This is their eyes opened to what they feel is like a hopeless situation. Not opened to the hope that's being offered, but open to something that they can't deal with. Then, at the bottom there, the second stanza, I know that getting hurt is really how redemption works. My ego is a ball and chain. My instincts only make it worse. In the morning light, I don't want to run from pain, You know I can't afford to cheapen grace. I know that pain just means my soul's awake. What does that even mean? But it's taking for ourselves what we think we need rather than allowing what is given to us to form us and shape us. I'm also going to read to you from one of my favorite books. It's called Heart of the World. Basically, it's a dialogue between Jesus and a soul. And so this is a part where Jesus is speaking to the soul, and it's kind of a reflection on the Sacred Heart. So this is what Jesus is saying to the soul. Since you are so wounded and the open torment of your heart has opened up to the abyss of your very self, put out your hand to me and with it feel the pulse of another heart. Through this new experience, your soul will surrender and heave up the dark gall which it has long collected. I must overpower you. I cannot spare exacting from you your melancholy, your most loved possession. Give it to me. Even if it costs you your soul and your inner self thinks it must die. Give me this idol, this cold, stony clot in your breast, and in its place I will give you a new heart of flesh that will beat to the pulse of my own heart. Give me this self of yours, which lives not on being able to live, not on its being able to live, which is sick because it cannot die. Let it perish, and you will finally begin to live. You are enamored of the sad puzzle of your incomprehensible ego, but you have already been seen through and comprehended. For look, if your heart accuses you, I am nevertheless greater than this, your heart. This is what God is trying to break through. This is what it means to be childlike. This is where pride gets in the way. Because pride is the barrier to those unseen things that we are searching for and longing for. Because those unseen things can't be controlled. I can't manifest them and create them myself. And pride becomes a barrier because it keeps me from being receptive and receiving. Part of the struggle is that if we live in a Christian culture, the culture itself will uphold a lot of those unseen things. And I can go about my life living within the way those are being offered to me. When a Christian culture dissipates, those unseen things are no longer upheld by the culture. They're scattered and they're broken and fractured. And then we have to make a choice for ourselves. Will I seek out the things that offer the unseen things? Or am I going to live in the chaos of a non-Christian culture? Let me give you a simple example. And people from my parish will be annoyed because I brought it up multiple times in homilies. Sunday is a day of rest. We actually don't appreciate and value rest in our culture, right? We don't. We value hard work, long work. The harder you work, the more hours you put in. Good for you, 80-hour week. Wow, that's amazing. What, you relaxed for 3 days just 'cause? Well, man, you're lazy. Why didn't you do something? And because of that, we now no longer don't have rest. The only way you can get rest now is if you run away. And so you have to go all the way to Mexico just so you can find some rest, because if you stay at home, there is no rest. Right? I've been talking about this all the time because it's thrown me. Talking to a parent of a child in hockey this year, and I guess, at least for some teams in Camrose, they're only getting their hockey schedule like 2 weeks in advance. They're literally slaves to hockey. They can't schedule any of their life until they get the hockey practices and hockey games that they're supposed to be at, and then they can move all the rest of their life around that. And so we don't have any day of rest. So when do we rest? How do we find rest? Then we just try to escape to get away from it. Some of you will have a memory of when Sunday was rest. The deacon in my parish says that it was like a whole ad in the paper in Camrose the first time a store stayed open on a Sunday. And it was this big, huge deal that there was actually a store open on a Sunday. But what does that do if the culture upholds that this is rest time? There's no sports. There's no stores open. You make dinner with whatever ingredients are at home. So there's not really anywhere to go. You have to stay home or you drive over to a friend or a family member's house. And then that's just what you do. And everybody decides to do it together. The only time where that's kind of hanging around, but it's starting to fade, is Christmas. We almost want to do it that day. But now Shoppers Drug Mart and McDonald's are open on Christmas Day, and people are bustling around. But my favorite time is after midnight mass and going home, because it's dead. It's the only time for me that I experience stillness everywhere and rest. When the culture upholds the unseen things, they're just naturally given to us. When the culture doesn't, we have to make choices in our life that allow those to come to us. Coming to the end. Our Catholic life. 3 staples: prayer, sacraments, and community. What does prayer offer to us? Why is it an antidote to anxiety? When we really pray, we're acknowledging I'm not alone. There's never a time in my life where I am alone. Even if I feel alone in my own marriage, when I pray, I am not alone. Prayer is the acknowledgement, the willingness to acknowledge, I don't need to be in control. My life is a mess, it's a disaster, I don't know what I'm doing, but I don't need to be in control. And I can still be okay, because God's in control, and whatever chaos is there, I'll just take the next step through that chaos, and God will tell me what the next step from there is. Think about it this way. If we believe that the soul exists, how can we not pray? If your body needs oxygen to live, what keeps your soul awake? What keeps your soul pointed in the right direction? If we don't pray, our soul atrophies. And then we become less and less capable of receiving those unseen gifts that God desires for us. The sacraments, an antidote to shame. If you really stop and think what happens when you come and receive the Eucharist, what we profess to believe as Catholics, that the eternal creator of the universe, in a moment, willingly unites himself to your very being, regardless of your state in life. That in that moment, the perfect God, the unconditional loving God, no matter how you came to Mass that day, if you open your hands to receive, offers himself to you. The one that threw me, I wish I would remember where I read it, but reading on the life of the priest, after I was first ordained, at Mass, God becomes obedient to the priest. That when he speaks the words of institution, take this, all of you, God obeys the priest. Or in baptism, you are made a son, a daughter of God. And from that moment forward, you are unconditionally loved and redeemed. And let's not pretend like any one of us here actually knows what unconditional love actually is. We don't. We have an idea. Hopefully we've grown up in a family that has kind of fostered love, but there is not a single person here that actually has an understanding and a grasp of what unconditional, unmerited love looks like. But in the sacraments, we are offered the possibility of coming to know it more profoundly. In confession is scary. I always tell the kids at first confession, I did the math one time, I think I've been to confession over 500 times in my life. I still get nervous, and I've been going to the same priest for 15 years. He could probably tell me all of my sins before I get there. But what are we doing? I'm letting go of my pride and my own self-accusation and my own self-judgment and saying, Lord, what are you offering me? And hopefully, through the priest who desires the salvation of your soul, you're going to hear not your own self-judgment and your own accusation, but God's mercy and the way forward through whatever your choices have created in your life. And then community. Here's one of the great and awful things about being Catholic. You don't choose your Catholic community. Evangelical churches, you kind of like church hop and you figure out which community best fits with my mindset and my way of life, which pastor's going to give me the message that's most often in alignment with what I'm looking for. If you're Catholic, whatever church is where you live, that's where you go. So whatever pastor you have, you're stuck with. Whoever's stuck in the front pew is probably going to be in that pew for the rest of your time in that parish because nobody budges from their pew. And so that annoying old lady who, even when you show up and she's kneeling to pray her rosary, won't move, and so you're stuck sitting like this until she's done praying her rosary, she's part of your community. But the unseen things that we're looking for don't come from our own creation. They come from experiencing community with whoever's there. That's been a realization for me as a pastor the last couple of years. I have to love everybody in my parish. Like the people that I don't get along with, doesn't matter. I still have to relate to them as their spiritual father. In the same way that a parent, even if their daughter or son through their teenage years is more than a handful and you don't know what to do with them, doesn't stop you from loving them and trying to find a way to help them better themselves. Why, as a Christian, if you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself, are we not striving to do that for everyone that we know? But we put limits on what that love might be. I can't get along with that person, so they're going to sit on that side of the church, and I'm going to make sure that I sit on that side of the church. And I'm going to get out of the church faster than that person so that we don't have to cross because we had that fight that one time. Community is part of where we find those things. The tail end. Caveats to the thesis at the beginning that maybe the most prevalent cause of mental health issues is not stress or circumstances, but rather our pride. You can't pray away depression. We are body and soul. And so you can't just try to fight spiritually something that is more than just a spiritual battle. And one of the things that I tell people often that are depressed, you probably should pray less when you're depressed by yourself. Because part of the problem when you're depression is your thoughts. And so if you go to pray in silence by yourself, what's going to dominate? Your thoughts. And it's not actually going to be prayer. You're going to try, but it's not going to work very well because your thoughts are so controlling of what you think and what you do. So pray in community. Pray actively. Walk and pray the rosary rather than sit and pray the rosary. Come and do devotions with people in the parish because you have to get out of your head and your prayer has to become incarnate in your body because you can't just pray away depression. However, St. Mark Tianjiang is a Chinese man, Chinese Catholic man. He was a well-respected doctor. He had a severe stomach ailment that he attempted to treat with opium, which he did, which wasn't bad, but then he became addicted to opium. And then he couldn't shake his addiction. He went to confession over and over again for his opium addiction. He kept going to Mass. The priest, because at that time they didn't really understand addiction, stopped giving him absolution and confession because he figured this guy just isn't trying hard enough to get rid of this in his life. Eventually, he was martyred. Still an opium addict. But he didn't let despair creep into his life. Even though he struggled with that addiction, and in Chinese culture, shame is huge, and being an addict is very shameful, and so he would have been isolated from family and friends, and yet he still went to Mass, and he still went to confession, and he died a martyr, strong in his faith till the end. Trauma is real, and it has significant and lasting effects. We know this. You experience it in your kids, and the way that that affects their behaviors. That marks us. We can't get rid of that. Whatever we've experienced in our life shapes us. We don't get rid of our past. We hopefully can integrate it, but we don't get rid of it. However, St. Josephine Bakita was from Sudan, and when she was young, 11, 12 years old, she was kidnapped and then sold into slavery. She was sold and bought, I think, 11 times over, 12 times over. She was tortured and beaten regularly. She has, I think I wrote it down. I did not write it down. But she had something like over 100 scars on her body from all the beatings that she took. Finally, she was sold to an Italian man as a slave who treated her better than anybody else. But the family was going away, and so they put her in a convent to look after her while they were away. When they came back to come and reclaim her because she was the nanny for their kids, she refused to leave. And all the sisters fought for her, and she stayed in the convent for the rest of her life. St. Josephine Bakita, from her own words, thanked her captors and all of her slave owners because without them, she would have never come to know God. Last one, sometimes life is more than we can handle. Sometimes there's a lot coming our way all at once. And I've experienced people in my life where it's just like, I don't even know what to say. Like, that just seems unmanageable and unreasonable. But St. John Paul II, his mom died when he was 9. His brother died when he was 12. His dad died when he was 21. About that same time was the Second World War in Poland. And right after the Second World War, then came communism. And then he slowly deteriorated at the end of his life with some form of Parkinson's that took away all of his faculties along the way. And yet, I can't remember the name, he wrote a whole encyclical on the goodness of Christ's suffering and our suffering along the way. And I don't think anybody would say that John Paul II was a depressed pope. So what am I saying? Yes, there are real things that we need to deal with in mental health and are difficult and challenging and often have complicated solutions. But maybe at the same time, we don't give enough credence to what this faith thing is and what's actually being offered to us. Because if in the saints we see examples of how the external circumstances should have taken over their life and severely hampered them, they allowed, by God's grace, those difficult circumstances to shape their life into holiness and sanctity. In the end, the struggles of life are kind of like this image here of the depiction of Jesus asleep in the boat while the disciples are frantically trying to stay afloat in the storm. Sometimes it doesn't make sense why there's all that stress and difficulty of circumstance in our life. But what we remember as children of God, as dependent beings, is that even when God seems silent, He is there. We are not alone, and we are not responsible. So, what I want to do to finish, spend the next 2 minutes just pondering, where's the pride in my life that keeps me from being receptive to others, to God? And if helpful, just reflect on this image of the fear in the disciples' eyes and the one who is in control and the one who is responsible there in the boat, never far away, leading us through.
Don't do that. I hate this part. Somebody gives a speech, a talk, they kill it, they crush it. There's a moment of extreme poignancy, and some guy's got to get up, some ham-fisted attempt to recap the speech you were all at in some manner that brings it all to a conclusion. But thank you so much, Father Kris. You're truly a blessing to Elk Island Catholic Schools. I'm going to offer my reflection of what I was thinking about. You were all here for the talks. I'm not going to summarize it, and I don't think I could. But what a privilege it is for us to be able to gather today, regardless of what we do in Elk Island Catholic Schools. We have custodians, we have bus drivers, we have our IT, we have EAs, we have teaching staff, all aspects of the work serving our students in Elk Island Catholics. To be able to engage this aspect of our lives. There's a thought that Catholic schools or Catholic education means we do education plus. And I guess I'd like to challenge that a little bit today. My preferred interpretation of the word Catholic means according to the whole. It's one of the ways you can interpret the word. And so you've always heard me say, or maybe you've heard me say, this idea of faith integration. And integration was a theme of the topic today. And it's because I say that because the privilege and the call for each of us is to be able to make whole education for the children by adding the spiritual aspect that Father Kris so enunciated for us this day. That's something that our neighbors, well-meaning, great people, great teachers, supporting their kids, just don't get to do. And it's a privilege we have. And so I would humbly suggest that maybe we don't do education plus. Maybe Catholic education is actually the fullness of education. And I'd ask you to think about that as we integrate this life. And I hope that, well, I know the takeaways from today, the idea of prayer, sacraments, and community represent exactly what we come together to do today. It is our idea of wellness. We come together to pray, we come together to celebrate the sacraments, and we spend time in community. And so I will wrap this up to keep you, not to keep you from having some time in community there as well, but I wanted to say what a true privilege it is to have you working with our Here Comes the Sun project, have you working in our various schools and with our students and staff. Thank you so much, Father Kris. You are a blessing. You were eerily on point about budget cuts, but we'll leave that for another day. One last group to thank before we head off today. As I said, I used to be involved in all the details of this day, and that is, other people are doing that. And so I just wanted to express my heartfelt appreciation on behalf of everyone here to Jody and the SSF team for the amazing work you do setting up this whole day, for the privilege of all of us. Thank you so much. We are so very grateful. Okay, I'm looking around to make sure Deacon Lynn's not here to do this part. Now I'm telling you to, I have two more things I'm supposed to say. Enjoy your afternoon. Please be on time for your sessions, and please attend the sessions you've signed up for, and have a wonderful afternoon, and God bless.